volunteer opportunities, and community-based research. Holly brings both a breadth and a depth of experience in community engagement and research to the Honors College. After receiving her Bachelor of Science in Mathematics with a minor in music from Chatham University in 2004, she interned with a publishing company in Paris before a 3-year stint with Forge in Zambia, where she continued community service programs in refugee camps, including training and leading students from Pitt and UCLA to be project facilitators in the camps. The student facilitated programs included literacy, health, sports, and music. After Forge, Holly continued working in Zambia with Poverty Action Lab, administering research studies on topics including malaria, reproductive health, and girls' education. Returning to the States, she worked at Northern Illinois University for a year and a half before returning home to Pittsburgh, where she spent a year-long small consulting project and having her adventures with her preschool-aged kids. Help me welcome Holly.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk to you about my experience in Zambia, and before I get started, I have this slide up here. There's been a lot of news in Zambia lately that I've been following because it's my second home. But the president of Zambia passed away last week. He's the guy on the left, Michael Sata, and the vice president of Zambia, who is now the acting president, is Guy Scott, and he's the one standing next to Obama in the picture. He's the first white president in Africa since apartheid, and so this was generating some news. He can't be the president. They have to have elections. His parents weren't born in Zambia, and that's one of the requirements for being president. But I actually had lunch with him once before he was in the government, and he told me some interesting things about development. Maybe I'll mention it later. I saw in the bill that I'm talking about public health. I will talk about, no, I'm not talking about public health. I'm talking about, well, here's my title.
That's what you're talking
Refugees
about.
and research in Zambia. So there's Zambia. Have any of you been to Zambia? Anybody in this room? No. Yes, cool. Has anybody ever worked with refugees before? Awesome. Okay, a few hands. Thanks. So that's where it is, the landlocked middle of southern Africa. And here's a close-up version of Zambia. The places with the big red circles are places where I've lived or worked. So Lusaka is the capital, middle here. Down in the bottom left is Livingstone. That's where you have Victoria Falls. I've worked up in these northern ones, the 3 up in the north, are all places where they've had refugee camps, and Chipata is another place where I've worked. I've been back in America for 3.5 years, and I haven't been back to Zambia. Like I said, I consider it to be my second home. I have a blog about Nyanja. It's one of the 73 languages of Zambia, and it's my little pet project. I'm just showing you that. Another recent news is that Zambia, the week before the president died, they celebrated their 50th Independence Day. And in Pittsburgh, the Zambians in Pittsburgh had this big 50th Independence Day celebration, and I went there with my daughter. That's my daughter, and in the middle, that's a fashion show, which my daughter also participated in, and there's me. Okay, so Forge. Forge is the organization that I worked for when I first went to Zambia. We worked in refugee camps. One of the coolest things about being back at Pitt is that the Forge student groups are still going on at Pitt and at CMU, I believe. And they tutor refugees who are living in America. The original Forge started as a nonprofit organization that took students from colleges in America to go volunteer in refugee camps. And this I pulled off of the UNHCR website. This is a news article that came out in 2005. And you can see the books in the background. This is one of the libraries that Forge started. They brought a whole bunch of books. All these guys in the photo are my really good friends. They're the original librarians, and I'm going to tell you more about that Okay, so the first place I worked in Zambia was Maheba refugee settlement. When you think of a refugee camp, I think what we have in our mind is you think of like tents, you think of people running from war and then having to have a safe place to live. This settlement was a long-term refugee settlement. It wasn't a camp. They would have new people coming in, but it wasn't like a tent village like what you kind of think of when you think of a refugee camp. Maheba was established in 1971 in response to the Angolan War of Independence, and so there was this influx of Angolan refugees into Zambia, and they set them up here in Maheba. It's in the middle of nowhere. They put them in a place where there wasn't already a village. There was nothing. It's a 2-hour drive from the nearest small town. In 1971, it was a tiny town. Right now, the town that it's close to, Solwezi, is actually quite bustling. They have mines there that are attracting business, and they have hotels, and it's more of a city now. But back in 1971, they just put these refugees in the middle of nowhere and kind of set them up. After that, there continued to be more influxes of Angolans as Angola kept having different civil wars and things like that. Then Congolese started coming in the 90s, and they put them together with the Angolans. So they had like Angolan section and the Congolese section, and then the Burundians and the Rwandans started coming, and they came to the same refugee camp. One reason why Zambia hosts a lot of refugees is because they're really stable. They've never had a civil war. They've never had, guerrilla warfare or, tribal fighting or anything like that. Zambia is one of the countries in Africa that's always been really peaceful. And Zambians actually take a lot of pride in being peaceful. When you go there, they'll tell you, like, Zambia is a peaceful nation. This is something that every Zambian will say. This refugee settlement also had people from Sudan and from other countries. I tried to find numbers about how many people lived in Maheba, and I had a hard time finding the numbers on the internet, but from what I remember from when I worked for Ford, there once were more than 60,000 refugees, and when I was there were about 30,000. People they've been sending them back to their home countries, or a lot of them have been resettled in America, Australia, Europe. So now there's about 10,000 or less. I'll do my last point on here, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about refugees in Zambia. So recently, in the past couple of years, Angolans and Rwandans in Zambia are no longer recognized as refugees. So some of them have been allowed to apply for residency, others sort of, if you're a refugee and you're living in a country that's not your home country and they tell you you're not a refugee anymore, you don't have papers, you're basically an illegal immigrant. So if they don't give residency to everyone there, the people who are left are undocumented or they have to go home or whatever. So I want to tell you a little bit about what life is like in a refugee camp. Let's see what my next slide is. Okay, there's a pretty picture. This is a picture of Maheba. You can see a house in the middle there. There's some goats here. It was kind of sprawling. It was set up like a village. People had farms, and they were able to sort of just set up their life there. It was kind of, if you can imagine the Angolans who came in 1970s and stayed, they just started a new life here. They had their life, they did trading. The only problem was they weren't allowed outside the camp. And that's really a barrier to progress when you're living somewhere. They could, if they wanted to leave and go to Lusaka, the capital, and try to do trading or something, they had to get special permission, and they couldn't just live freely in Zambia. And they lived there, they had their lives there, they got married, and they had babies, and children grew up there, and they had babies, and all these people living in the refugee camp were all considered to be refugees. And it's really, in some ways, people can say that they have it off easier than people living in just a normal village in Zambia that would be in poverty, because the UN is there making sure they have clean water and making sure they have food rations and things like this. But the fact that they weren't allowed to move freely was really a hindrance. So here's, I'll start talking about Forge now. So the way Forge started was at semester at sea, the students who are on the ship going around to different countries and studying things, they stopped in Tanzania, and they didn't want to just do a tourist attraction. They wanted to see, some sort of poverty, or they wanted to see something like the real Africa. So they decided to go to a refugee camp, and they were so moved by what they saw that they went back, and at semester at sea, there were people from different universities. They came back to America, they decided, let's do something. And they organized in their own campuses groups of students to go back to the refugee camps the following year. And they brought things, and this huge shipment of books was one of the things that they brought. It was like, college-age people, passionate, untrained people wanting to do good, and I believe that they did do some good, but it's hard when you're just kind of like winging it. Like, I want to help people, but trying to do your own ideas instead of necessarily trying to. When you're only there for the summer, there's not a huge amount of change that you can do. So things to think about. Anyway, this is a picture of the library. So the students sort of came up with their own projects and brought them to the refugee camp. So the library is one of them. Let me show you. So on the left here is where I lived when I lived in the refugee camp. So what I did was, the students came and started these projects, and I have pictures of some other ones, but there was the library, they had a sports league, they had women's health education, they had a bunch of different little projects that they did in the refugee camp. And the projects were all meant to do like support education and quality of life. The UN was making sure people had, like I said, water and food and healthcare and stuff, but what Forge did was the extra kinds of things. Like I said, it's hard to create change when you just go for the summer, and when I came onto Forge, they wanted somebody to, like, okay, these college kids came and they left, why didn't somebody go and stay there and live there and help these projects continue? And that's what I did. So I was pretty much straight out of college myself, also untrained, degree in math. I did not know about international development or how to work with people in a refugee camp, but I went over there, calmed myself down, and tried to help some of these projects continue. It was a really great learning experience. Anyway, this is where I stayed. I didn't have electricity. The boy in the picture here, Meg, we're still in touch. He lives in Lusaka now. We're friends on Facebook, but he helped us out with some of the household stuff. And on the right is my friend Peter, who's from Sudan, and his wife, who's from Angola, and their little house in Lingo. So that's just another picture of what it looks like there. These are the librarians from the first picture, but this is their house where they live. Paul's holding the guitar, he's from Sudan. Two of the guys in the picture are from Congo, and two of the guys are from Angola. Forge, one of the actually impactful things that Forge did was sponsoring some of their former refugee employees to go to university in Zambia. And this group of guys got sponsored to go to university, and the two from Angola are now back in Angola, and they're working for BP, the oil company, and they have really swanky jobs. And when I want to go back and work in Africa, I'm going to call them and ask them to meet up. But that's just to say, the life of a refugee isn't necessarily a sentence to a life of poverty. Another one of these guys in the picture, W, he still lives in a refugee camp, and so there's also that disparity. Here I am with some of the other workers in the refugee camp. This was an art education program that Forge did. It was cool. They had Zambians and some refugee leaders who were teaching art to the kids, and they had a really good time. I can't say whether or not it was life-changing, but everybody who was involved in it really enjoyed it. Some of these guys in the picture have been resettled to the States, and they're going to school here and studying here. Others of them, I'm sure, are still in the refugee camp or in villages. This is my friend Mary Tembo. She's a Zambian who was working in the Heba in the camp, and she's pregnant in this picture. She was working for the Women's Health Education Center, and we brought this book called Where Women Have No Doctor. And Mary, or did I say her name was Mary? Her name is Jennifer. Jennifer Tembo. Jennifer read the book, and she was teaching the book to people. This book is like Where Women Have No Doctor. It's from a series. There's Where There Is No Doctor. But it's a health guide for people living in villages who don't have access to health care at all. She read the book, and she had intended to go see her mother in Lusaka when it was time to have the baby. Well, the baby came earlier than she thought, and she was still in the camp, and they have a health clinic there, and she went there, and nobody was there. And this woman delivered her own baby. She guided her friend who wasn't a midwife. After reading this book, she guided her friend in how to help her have a baby. So she's hardcore. So that was all about Maheba. Kala and Wangi were two other camps that we worked in, and they were kind of different. So whereas Maheba was sort of this strange multicultural African village with people from many different ethnicities living harmony together as one, Kala and Wangi were just Congolese refugees. They were more compact. It wasn't sprawled out. They did live in houses, but they were set up on a grid, set up in rows. They didn't have as many people. Kala and Wangi have actually closed, and it's a lot of the Congolese went back to Congo. A lot of my Sudanese friends went back to Sudan when South Sudan first became a country, and they thought there was going to be peace. And it's really heartbreaking to know that some of the people who've gone back to their home countries thinking that there was going to be peace, that more violence has erupted after that, and I worry about them. Like I know I have friends who are living really close to some places where we keep hearing stories about violence. So this is the group of students from Pitt. Well, some of the people in this picture are students from Pitt, and some of them are refugees. We went to Kala Camp in 2007. This is one of the projects that they have in Kala. We brought secondhand laptops, like donated laptops, and we started a computer literacy, like a computer lab where people could learn computer skills. Just really exciting because you're taking people, I mean, some of the people in camp are literate, some of them aren't, but to take people who've never used a computer before and teach them how to turn it on, teach them how to use Word, and these are skills that I know at least one story of someone who went through the program and went back to Congo and got a job because of the skills that he had. And this is anecdotal evidence. I don't know what an impact we had or not. Antoine, who's standing in the picture, he's an example of, when we talk about refugees, it's not just poor village people who end up being refugees. Antoine was the son of a very prominent person in his town, and he had started going to college. And he had already done some college when he had to run away from war. And he was studying computers, and in the refugee camp, he got to teach computers. And now he's graduated, and I think he's doing well. But that's just to say, refugees come in all different forms. There's something else I wanted to say about refugees. In Maheba, where you have the Angolans and the Congolese and the Rwandans, Burundi's, there's this tendency to look at someone and know that they're a refugee and think that they have this horrible story. And some of them do. And some of my friends who I know have these awful stories like being beaten, seeing seeing your family killed in front of you, seeing your female family members beaten and raped in front of you, being forced to do some of those horrible things to people you love at gunpoint. I don't even want to tell you the stories, but they're really horrible stories. Some of the refugees have these stories. Others of the refugees, like in Mehiba, some of them were born there and they hadn't gone through these incredible traumatic events. And some of them, like some of the two guys who were working for BP, they weren't beaten, tortured, and they didn't see all that, but their family was running from violence and they walked from Angola to Zambia to get away from the violence, but they didn't actually experience the violence. So, but when we're talking about refugees, there's also a huge diversity of experience. And speaking about the horrible stories, there's no mental health. Like, in my experience in the refugee camps, there's just mental health wasn't being addressed at all. Let's see what the next picture is. This is a health education class. Here I am with my friend Julius. He lives in England now. He's next to a library in college camp. Okay, that's my last slide about refugee camps. You guys can ask me, I want to take a pause. Does anyone have questions about refugees in Zambia or anything that I've said so far? Because I'm going to completely talk about something different. We can save it till the end, too. Okay. So all of that was rural Zambia, middle of nowhere. It takes you 8-hour bus ride and then another 3-hour bus ride, and then it's very remote. And I worked in refugee camps for about 3 years. I spent a lot of my time during those 3 years in the capital though. This is Lusaka, capital of Zambia. When I stopped working with Forge, I started working for Poverty Action Lab, and I was helping with research projects that were being done in Zambia. I was like the field research administrator. The person who was conducting the research was based at Harvard Business School. This is where I lived when I lived in Lusaka. My little house. There's the car that we had and the chickens that our neighbors had. This is our back window. Our neighbors were growing maize. Okay, so Poverty Action Lab is also known as JPAL because it's called Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab. There's also an organization called IPA, which is Innovations for Poverty Action, and these two organizations work together all over the world to do randomized controlled trials on poverty issues. So the idea is, like I was saying about our experience with Forge, we were young untrained people showing up in a place where there's poverty and problems, thinking like, oh no, we want to help people, what should we do? And then just trying to do whatever we think of, or talking to people in the community and doing their ideas. What JPEL and IPA do is, okay, there's problems, there's ideas for solutions. Let's test them and see what works. Let's see what works best. Let's see what doesn't work. And they do these long, over a long period of time, large-scale randomized controlled trials. So, for instance, you want to find out something about the city. So you take the map of the city and you randomize the quadrants and you interview people from different parts, and it's all very scientific. You do your treatment to some of the randomized people, and then some of the randomized people you do nothing to, and then it comes out, the research comes out, and you see like which programs are actually working. And for instance, like if you're going to spend $100 on a development project, which project is going to take your money the farthest? The person I was working for is named Nava Ashraf. She's an associate professor at Harvard Business School, and her specialty is negotiations, organizations, and markets. She's an economist. A lot of her projects have to do with public health. And I'm going to talk about some of the research projects that I worked on for her. The things I'm about to talk about, she was a co-PI on, so there were other authors, but she's the common author, and she was my boss. So don't let me take credit for things that were her idea, but I was on the ground doing the grunt work. And so here's some of the things that I was doing when I was working for her. And let me just say that, you know, I worked on these research projects for 3 years. The kind of stuff that I was doing was things that somebody usually does in a gap year. Say you're studying development economics and you want to go on to do your PhD, and you need to go get some field research. You work for JPL or IPA for a year or for a semester or for a summer, and then you go back. So I was there holding down the fort, and I saw all these people who were on this academic track just coming, doing the research, and then going on, but I was just there continuing to do it. So part of the things that I did, I assisted with survey design, I arranged for survey translation and back translation, and then cleaning up the translation. It's really fun. Holding focus groups, piloting studies in remote areas. So if they wanted to when they wanted to do a study in Lusaka, they would go over to Chipata and pilot it and see what worked, what didn't work, and then come to the big study. Recruiting, hiring, and training, and managing surveyors. So local people who are out there to actually do the surveys, because no one, the Zambians aren't going to want Nava Ashraf or me as a foreigner to go in and ask them a bunch of questions. They're much more likely to answer it in their own language and with people they know, or people they can relate to. Keeping surveys organized, and I did recruiting, hiring, training, and managing the data entries. And the data entry is a whole huge process of field research. You would need to do data entry and then double enter it and then see where the discrepancies are and clean the data. And so this is the things that I was doing when I was there. I also got to serve as a liaison between Harvard Business School and local nonprofits and government officials. And this is something that when the people, like I said, like the gap year people, or those of us who were coming in with, you know, by this time I had some experience. I wasn't completely fresh, like when I started with Forge, but I was there, you know, as a, you know, 26-year-old young woman, sort of dressing up and like going into these like big meetings where like important people were there from government ministries and stuff, and sort of trying to represent the group who was studying Harvard Business School. And that was another really great way for me to have experience. And it's something like if you have a bachelor's degree in America, that doesn't really say much in a lot of ways. But if you have a bachelor's degree and you're in Zambia, you have a lot more credibility and you get a lot more respect than you deserve. That's how I felt. So some of the research studies that I worked on that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. So one was about household bargaining and excess fertility. I'm not going to read these. These are the names of them, but I'm just going to go and tell you about them because they're long names and it would be more interesting if I could just tell you about it. So the first one I'm going to talk to you is about a study on fertility. You know, how many, like fertility of whether or not you're going to have a baby, contraception, how many kids you have. This picture is friends of mine from the village who, there's their first 3 children. They have another one now and one on the way. This kind of picture demonstrating fertility. So the fertility study that I did with Dr. Ashraf was really cool. They were giving women a voucher to go to a clinic and access birth control services. They were doing an injection. And they would give the woman the voucher and tell her about it. One randomized group was, they would just do it with the surveyor and the woman on their own. Like, okay, this is all about family planning, blah, blah, blah. You can go to this clinic and here's your voucher. Take you to the front of the line at the clinic. The other group of people, they sat down the women with their husbands together and told both of them about it. You know, how many kids do you want to have? And do you know that you can put off having kids until later? And just the same exact speech, but with the husband. And so they're trying to get at, you know, are women more likely to access birth control if they can hide it, or if when they're doing it, their husband kind of knows about it. And so the results were, that women were 19% less likely to visit the clinic if a husband knew. They were 25% less likely to use concealable contraception, and they were 27% more likely to give birth. So the idea is that the husbands aren't on board. They aren't necessarily as supportive of family planning after they want their wives to keep having babies. I mean, this is not, these numbers like 19%, 27%, I'm not saying that all Zambian men are like this. It's just, these are the study results. So I'm sure there were plenty of men in the study who supported whatever their wives wanted. The other interesting thing that came out was that women who were told about it on their own reported lower subjective well-being, so they are happier. I can't say more about that study. The work that I did on this was data entry. This was the first study that I worked on, and I was the double data enterer. They started me slow, but soon I got to do more interesting things. Another study that we did was about goods that you can sell that are for social goods. So we looked at female condoms. This is a product that can have really great benefits to public health. If you're a woman and your male partner does not refuses to use a condom, but you still want to protect yourself from STDs and unwanted pregnancy. I mean, HIV is a huge problem in Zambia and a lot of Southern Africa. The female condom is seen as sort of a solution to these. That said, the female condom is a strange product to most people. It's not even, like, I definitely knew about it before I went to Africa, but it's not available at CVS down the street. It's not popular. It's weird. People don't want to put something because it goes inside your body. It's kind of weird. You have to be comfortable touching yourself and things like that. So it's not a wildly popular product, but it's a product. Has a great purpose and it can do good things. And so what we're looking at is if you're selling female condoms, what is going to motivate you to sell female condoms? Is it the fact that you're helping people? Or is it because you get profit for selling it because it's a product? And the people that we used in the study to distribute the condoms were hairdressers and barbers in Lusaka. And the idea was that when you're, especially with hairdressers, if you're sitting there for many, many hours getting your hair braided, you're likely to talk about personal stuff. You're more likely to talk about personal stuff to your hairdresser or barber than you would be like to just walk into a pharmacy and say, hey, I want female condoms. So they used hairdressers and barbers in Lusaka. They looked at the whole city. And this is a picture of a hair salon. And the woman standing is one of the people we worked with a local organization called Society for Family Health. She was somebody who went around telling people about female condoms, and the women, we have hairdressers in the picture and this young lady getting her hair done. But we had everything from just a makeshift hair salon or barbershop where it's made out of boards to something that's more substantial. Even the modern ones in the shopping mall were part of this study. They took the whole city of Lusaka, took it on a map, did GIS software, separated it into quadrants, made buffer zones because you didn't want somebody in this part of the study talking to somebody in this other part of the study. It was over a year long. We had people going out to give them more female condoms and record how many they were selling. there were 4 treatment groups in the study. So the people, they were randomly assigned to one of these 4 groups, and if you were in a group, you didn't know that the other groups even existed. There was low profit margin, high profit margin, pure volunteer, and status incentives. So the pure volunteer group was getting nothing. They were buying the female condoms at cost and then giving us the money, and like selling condoms for money, giving us the money, and then we bring them back. So the idea was, if those people sold any, it was purely because they wanted to help people. The low profit margin people were getting a tiny little monetary incentive. The high profit margin were obviously getting more, and the status incentives, they weren't getting money, but they were getting this lovely poster that they have in their wall in their barbershop or salon, and every packet of female condoms that they sold, they got one of the little boxes, they got a stamp in it. And if they filled up to a certain amount, at the end they got a certificate on their wall. And so, after over a year of this study going on, the results were, rewards can improve the performance of agents engaged in public service delivery. So they found that people receiving any kind of reward did better than the pure volunteer. Non-financial awards are effective at improving performance. So the people who weren't getting money, but they were getting the poster with the stamps and the certificate and everything, they were doing better than the volunteer group. They actually did the best of any group, this poster, they did the best of any group. But I think the biggest takeaway was that nobody sold very much. This is just a really hard product to push, so they couldn't. I feel like if they replicated the study using a different product, like the other products that they could use male condoms, they could use the chlorine that you put in your water, or mosquito nets, any of these things that are like products that are good for public health. So when we look at these other results, the effect of both rewards is stronger for pro-socially motivated agents. So one of the parts of the survey was to find out, before they even started the study, is this individual intrinsically motivated to want to help others? And the people who were previously intrinsically motivated to want to help others did better, no matter what group they were in. Let's look at the last one. The effect of both rewards is stronger when the relative value is higher. I feel like I messed up on that. I'm just going to skip that. This is, okay, I'm going to talk about the malaria project. This is the last one that I'll talk about today. This was not necessarily a randomized controlled trial, but we were doing an impact evaluation. So billions, I don't know how many, many dollars have been poured into Zambia to fight malaria. Malaria is, one of the biggest killers of people, children, really horrible disease, but it can be cured. You can take medicine for it and get better. And it's not expensive. So there's been all this money to fight malaria. Mosquito nets have been distributed, and areas have been sprayed with pesticides to kill mosquitoes. There's the malaria drugs that have been going around, and they recently introduced a rapid diagnostic test. So previously, to be diagnosed with malaria, if you have a fever and you're somewhere that has a microscope, they can take your blood, look at it under a microscope, and look at it and see if they see the malaria parasite. And then they know if you have malaria. But if you're somewhere that doesn't have a microscope, they can't diagnose it. And so what they would do is just give you the drugs. If you have a fever, better take the drugs and live than not take the drugs and risk it being malaria and then die. So that was the way malaria was previously diagnosed, but they've recently introduced a rapid diagnostic test that's in all over the country where it's a fingerprint. And it's a drop of blood, and it's just instant. You put it on the little stick and it tells you whether or And so we were looking at the results of all these things and trying to find out, has it actually reduced the instance of malaria? Now, in order to find this data, we need to know how many people are being diagnosed with malaria, how many people are dying of malaria. And being a field researcher on the ground made me realize that some of these statistics that we read all the time, it's really hard to have exact numbers for things. This picture, so all these books in the picture are these little notebooks that people record health information in. And they're recording it by hand. And if this office is in some remote district, they're getting information from health centers where people have written it by hand, and they're writing it by hand here, and then they're sending it to the provincial office, and the provincial people are copying it in their books, and then they're sending it to national. And it's just really hard to be confident that the numbers are correct. And so one of the big parts of this project was looking at the data that we had and looking at the gaps in the data and going out to remote places and trying to fill the gaps in the data. We would go out to different provinces and see, like, everybody bring from the different districts, bring your records in, and they have data officers, they have national healthcare system, so it's cool that everything's in one system. But we're just trying to go out to these places and get the right data. As a side note, the problem of handwritten records and having them be digital so that we can study them and make improvements is not unique to impoverished places. We have this problem in Pittsburgh. There are, municipalities that are keeping all their records on paper, and you have these piles of notebooks that need to just be digitized, and it's all the problems that we talk about aren't just in Southern Africa. All these problems that we have are also in Pittsburgh. So this is a picture of some of the malaria field work. You can see people writing in books and talking to each other. This is my friend Casey recording some stuff. This little boy is getting his fingerprint for a rapid diagnostic test. On the malaria thing, one of the biggest things that I discovered, and this is just learning about statistics and research, and not to just take, when you see a statistic or when you see a really snazzy infographic on the internet and it flashes past and there's like a pie chart and you read it and you agree with it and you believe it, you just have to sort of know that those numbers aren't necessarily what they seem. But so there's these graphs that you might see if you look at malaria in Southern Africa, where it's like malaria is going up and up and up, and then all of a sudden in 2010 it goes down. And they use these graphs to say, like, look, malaria, we're doing it, we're beating malaria. And remember how I was saying about the rapid diagnostic test? Before, when malaria is going up and up and up, this is during the time that every fever is being reported as malaria in some areas. So the people who are being reported as having malaria, actually, not all of them have malaria. Some of them just have an infection, they just have a fever. They're being given the drugs, but they don't actually have malaria. And then all of a sudden in 2010, when all the rapid diagnostic tests go out and people start being diagnosed on the spot and knowing whether they have it or not, all of a sudden the malaria cases go down. So it's not that malaria had actually gone down, although I do believe that a lot of the efforts have helped in reducing malaria. But it's just to know not to believe every graph that you see, because that malaria is going. The original malaria wasn't as high as we thought. That doesn't mean that the public health problem still exists. People being sick and people dying is still a problem. But knowing what problems to solve is really important. So we don't need to just pat ourselves on the back like, oh, we're winning against malaria. What we need to do is like go out and see if people are still dying, if they're dying of other stuff, what are we going to do? So I threw in this picture. These are the library guys from Maheba again. They actually I threw this in there because some of them ended up working for Poverty Action Lab after they went to college and before they went to Angola to go work for BP. That's just, you don't have to pull me in that. It's just an anecdote. They're really smart guys. And these are my references. Thank you for listening to my talk.
We're going to open it up to questions, and also we're going to write the prompt on the board for you too. Okay? So, are there any questions for Talia?